Thanks so much.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. Caitlin, I don't know if everybody knows you, if they know you
Yes.
through registering. Okay, so no introductions needed.
I'll give a quick one real quick. My name is Caitlin Costello. I am the grants coordinator for GBCA. And today we're doing one of our first classes for the year. We're doing Grant Writing 101. Near the end, I will bring up our seminar list and the QR codes for the mentorship and one-on-one consults. If you have questions about our specific grants, all of the applications and guidelines and things are available on gvartscouncil.org for our 3 grant types. This program isn't going to quite cover the details of applying exactly for our grants, but more grant writing as a whole. And so I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. Welcome, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks so much for joining tonight. I am Jess Hassler-Southwell. I live in Webster, New York, currently, originally from Pafard, member of the GVCA board. So that's sort of how I'm linked in with this organization. But I do also run this class at the Rochester Brainery and with some other local organizations. I got the bulk of my grant writing experience during my tenure as the executive director of Girls Rock Rochester, applied for lots of funding for that amazing organization, but also have had the chance to have exposure to the grant review and feedback process through being a board member. So that's been valuable as well. So a little bit about me here. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to find grants. Congratulations, you've already found a great source for grants just by being here tonight. But I will talk about how to find other grant sources. I'll talk about building an application schedule. So really sharing my process that I used when I was at Girls Rock for just carving out time to find, new sources of funding. We'll talk about eligibility criteria and what to do before you actually create your grant application. And then we'll talk about the application content itself. And then I'm going to share with you my tool that I used to use for creating a content library, which becomes really helpful in being able to apply for lots of grants throughout the year. And we'll talk about awards and rejections. Hopefully we'll talk more about awards and a bit about grant reporting as well. So I invite you to chime in as we go along with questions. There will also be plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end too, because this presentation only takes about 40 or 45 minutes. And then if you feel more comfortable also putting questions in the chat, I'll keep my eye on that too. So feel free to post questions there if that's easier for you. So I would love to, we've got this sort of a small-ish group on the phone tonight. If you want to share your name, your organization or business, and what brings you here tonight, that might help me sort of tailor some of my content. Anybody want to go first? Who's feeling brave?
Okay, I'll go first.
Great, thanks, Laura.
As long as I can keep my camera off though?
Totally fine, yeah.
Okay, well, my name is Laura Thomas. I'm a playwright and I'd like to apply for grants to maybe get some of my plays produced and on stage. And I am at ground zero. I know zero about grant writing. And one thing you already did was you answered my question. I wasn't sure if this tonight would be about grant writing in general or specifically for the Genesee Valley Arts Council. So
yeah,
whatever
you'll get a little bit of both tonight, Laura. Caitlin will be able to give you some information about the GBCA grants.
Okay.
But all of my content is going to be, content about grant writing that you can take and use anywhere you go to apply for funding.
Okay, wonderful. I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having this.
Anybody else want to do an introduction?
Hi, I can start. My name is Pilar. I'm the president of the board of a nonprofit called Grupo Cultural Latinos in Rochester, and I'm also on the board of Rochester Greenovation. And I wanted to learn about grant writing because, especially with Grupo Cultural, we depend a lot on grants for our projects. We do a lot of shows, free classes for children and adults, and everything is to promote Latino culture in Rochester and Western New York. So that's why I want to learn how to get the best opportunities out there for our organization. And hi to Laura. We met Laura in other classes.
Oh yeah, playwriting class or writing class, I believe, right? Oh, okay. Nice to see you, Pilar.
Awesome. I love that small world of creative
Yeah,
people. That's awesome.
wonderful.
Well, welcome, Pilar. So great to have you with us tonight. And I'm hearing a lot about rock renovation, so very cool. Anybody else want to introduce themselves? No pressure, if not.
Hello.
Hi, Donna.
Hi. I spent about 10 minutes trying to find this link through Eventbrite. So that was not possible. So I apologize for my late entrance. I kept searching, and voila, I find on Gmail Zoom link. So here I am.
Awesome.
Thank you. I am a professor of dance, and I am about to direct the dances at Muck. I've been a part of the dances at Muck for a very long time. I'm a choreographer and a performer, and I've worked with Lori McFarlane and Ruben Ornelas for many years, and so I'm taking it on, and they receive a funding from you all, and of course every organization is a little bit different, and I know that grant writing is different than academic writing, so I just want to learn what it is you all are looking for. And so I really appreciate this opportunity.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Donna. So glad you could join us. Yeah, we're just getting started, so you haven't missed any of the good stuff yet.
Yay.
All right. Anybody else want to go, or we can get started too? All right, I'm going to go ahead and get rolling then. So agenda, just to sort of give Donna and anybody else who joined a little bit later a chance at what we're going to go over tonight. Again, this is not, my content isn't specific to the GBCA grant. Caitlin, our grants coordinator, is here to answer any questions you have specifically about the GBCA grants. I'm hoping that you will come away tonight with some really great sort of entry-level grant writing skills that you can use to apply for GBCA funds and funding, from other sources as well. So feel free to chime in with questions as we go. So I want to talk a little bit about finding grants, because that's sort of your square one. How do you even identify sources of funding for your particular project? I always recommend that you block time on your calendar to search for funding opportunities. And I would do that when I was in my ED role at Girls Rock. I would do that on a monthly basis. But I did it monthly because I started with a pretty good list of sources of funding that the organization had received grants from in the past. So if you don't have that existing list built out, you're probably going to want to do it a little bit more frequently. Maybe once a week you're getting online and you're looking for new funding opportunities. I also highly recommend setting up Google alerts that will push those opportunities to your inbox. So if you're not familiar with Google alerts, you can go into Google and you can, in your settings, input some keywords And what that will do is that will alert you via email when things that match those keywords hit the internet. So I would use things like, grant funding for girls and LGBTQ youth, or, grant funding for nonprofit organizations, community programs, dance performances, play productions, you name it. But I think it's a really easy way to just, take 5 minutes, set up those Google alerts, and then, anytime something's published about a new grant that becomes available, that just hits your inbox and you don't have to go searching for it. Definitely enroll in mailing lists and any subscriptions to organizations that are granting organizations like GBCA. So if you're a GBCA member, Caitlin has you on the distribution list. You'll get all the email blasts. You can follow on social media to see all the posts about when the application deadlines are. You'll get all the updates about the grants. So do all of those things to sort of make sure that new funding opportunities hit your radar. A couple of things that you can try searching for, geography and focus area are like good ways to do searching. So there are federal grants for everything under the sun. So you can search for federal grants that are available and then add on, your particular area of interest or expertise. State grants, city grants, regional grants, search at those levels as well. We are so fortunate that the state of New York has made arts a priority and has made so much funding available. So we're lucky in that regard. The city of Rochester has lots of funding available. I was just talking with Caitlin earlier about a client of mine who has applied for a City of Rochester grant. And, I was comparing that experience to GBCA because there's no grant coordinator for that grant. So it's a bit of a black hole in communicating there. So that's one of the things that makes working with a smaller organization like GBCA a better experience. But then there's also regional grants. So I would search using terms like, Finger Lakes or Tri-County, those kinds of things. And then we have lots of giving circles in our area. So if you're not familiar with giving circles, spend some time searching for giving circles. There's a women's giving circle in the Finger Lakes region. There's an African American giving initiative that is a giving circle. There's an LGBTQ giving circle as well, and many others. And giving circles, if you're not familiar with them, are not foundations, not government entities, but they're really just groups of like-minded people that come together and pool their private funding to fund programs and projects that they believe in. So giving circles are a great source of funding as well. And oftentimes can be a little bit less complicated from an application standpoint to write an application and ask for funding. And familiarize yourself with things in your area of interest. So, we've got a playwright, we've got a professor of dance, we've got some special interest groups here represented. So, thinking about arts and education, community, oriented focus areas. Those are all different ways to search for, grant funding related to, historic preservation, for example, would be a great search term to really narrow down your results for funding in that particular area. I'll pause for a second. If anybody has any questions.
No, not yet.
All right, great. Not to take away from GBCA, my heart is in GBCA, but I always love to plug the Community Foundation because they have an amazing website. So if you're not familiar with the Community Foundation, as soon as you get off this call or first thing tomorrow morning, hop on their website. They have a great website that allows you to search by keywords, search by categories. You can see here, we've got some different categories here. So if you were doing something, with the African-American community or with arts and culture, you can really sort of narrow down those different funding opportunities. They also have an email distribution list that you can subscribe to. So you can get email notifications whenever one of their foundation grant periods starts. So I would encourage you to check them out. That's also a connector to some of our local giving circles as well. You will find them through the Community Foundation. Creating a schedule. So when I was with Girls Rock, I wanted to be very organized and intentional about the way that I organized my time for grant writing, and then also kept track of the grant applications I was submitting and the feedback that I was getting and my success rate and failure rate, unfortunately, in some cases. So I created, and I'll show you on the next slide what it looks like. I created a Google sheet, spreadsheet, essentially. And what I wanted to do was create a tracking mechanism that would allow me to sort of see all of my grant opportunities, see the dates of the application deadlines, and then keep track of applications that I had submitted and the outcomes. So I would track the name of the organization that I was requesting funding from, the amount of funding that they were offering, a little description of what the opportunity was. Obviously, the application deadline is very important. I would also put in there a link to the site where the application was accessible, any key contact information. So like I would have had Caitlin's contact information in there as the grant coordinator. And then I would keep notes on, if I was going to include particular content in my narrative or, sort of anything specific to that application. Maybe a letter of intent was a prerequisite. Anything that I noted as I was out there doing my research on grant opportunities, I would keep it in this spreadsheet. And then once I wrote the application, I would keep track of whether or not I submitted an application and then whether or not I was awarded and any feedback that I got along the way. So that was really helpful in not just planning out, the order in which I would write grant applications, and choosing, sometimes you have too many funding opportunities. Sometimes all of your funding opportunities come, in the first quarter of the year, and you have to choose, how to allocate your time. So it was very helpful in being able to prioritize my activities. Let's see. So here's a little peek at what that looks like. And this was just a few rows of a many row spreadsheet, but I would keep track of the name of the organization, the amount of funding available, a little bit about the organization or the funding opportunity, and then the deadline. So, when do I need to apply by? And then any notes around, any other important deadlines, letter of intent, like I said, when they'll announce, those sorts of things. And then I would track whether or not I submitted that year, link to the application page, contact info. So I have Caitlin's information here. And then just any notes, anything anecdotal that's specific to that grant. So feel free to steal my sheet formatting. I found it to be very helpful. Also great to look back on previous sources of funding and what worked and what didn't work. I'll pause there for questions.
I like the layout very much, very informative.
Good. Yeah. The thing that I really found helpful was, the deadline column, because then you can sort of sort in order of deadline. And then I would be able to say, okay, what are all of my grants that are going to be opening in September, and how can I prepare in August for that, that sort of thing.
Okay, so when you found a grant you wanted to apply for, you just put it on your list?
I did, yeah.
okay.
So in that time that I would carve out, and like I said, I did it monthly, you may want to do it more often, but I would just add stuff to my spreadsheet, because oftentimes you're going to find something and the grant deadline has already passed for the year, or it's 5 months out. So I just throw it on the list there, and then, you can keep referring to your list to see what you've found that's, coming up that you can start working on.
Good, okay, this is good.
Great. Confirming eligibility is always super important. So reading the eligibility criteria carefully. You don't want to waste anybody's time if you're not eligible, and you don't want to waste your own time writing a whole application, narrative, all of that, creating content if you're not eligible anyway. And sometimes eligibility criteria can be super tricky, and you need to get clarification. That's what someone like Caitlin in a grant coordinator role can do. She can let you know whether or not you're eligible. Sometimes you do just have sort of a generic email inbox. Sometimes it's not always a real person that you have a direct line to, like Caitlin, but there will always be a place where you can send questions if you have questions about your eligibility. So when in doubt, definitely ask. I was working with a client who was applying for a grant recently, and there were pages and pages of information about this grant, and nowhere was it specific about organizational criteria. So it never explicitly said you had to be a nonprofit organization. And then there was a Q&A period, and folks had asked that question, and they weren't real direct in their answer. They were like, well, you could be a nonprofit organization, or you could get a fiscal sponsor, or maybe we would consider people with an LLC. So sometimes that's really tricky. Don't be afraid to ask questions, is what I want to emphasize here. And then once you determine if you're eligible, make sure you understand any pre-application requirements. So there are some organizations, not GVCA, but there are some organizations who will require that you register in advance to apply for grant funding, or submit a letter of intent or letter of support. So you just want to make sure you read through all of the details to make sure you know if there's anything additional on top of the application itself that you need to prepare. There are some grants, for example, that will require, if they are only considering nonprofit organizations, you have to validate your 501c3 status with them before you can submit an application. So just encourage you to read all the details, as long and boring as they may be. So creating the content, this is the hard part, and the most time-consuming part, because you have to put together a really compelling case for what you're asking for funding for. But also, oftentimes you will need to provide a lot of administrative information about your organization, your project. So what I've tried to do on this slide is sort of detail out all of the things that could be included in an application package. Things like important identification numbers, tax ID numbers, EIN numbers, that sort of thing. Contact information for people in your organization, a board or stakeholder listing. So if you have a board of directors, that's usually part of an application. Your organizational history is always super important. And if you don't have, sort of what would be considered a traditional organizational history for like a nonprofit organization, your background and experience as a creative is, sort of the same thing in this case, right? So how many years of experience do you have writing? How many productions have you put on? How many community programs have you supported? Oftentimes we can take our personal experiences and even volunteer experiences and, sort of create an organizational history that way. With nonprofit organizations, you're always sharing your mission and your vision and your purpose. That's not specific to nonprofits necessarily. I think probably everyone on this call has their own mission and vision and purpose for creating the things that they're creating and wanting to deliver the projects that they're working on. So I would consider those when you're thinking of building content as well. Then you've got your actual grant narrative, and that's just sort of the, what am I going to do if you give me your money? And then outcomes and success measures. So I think it's really important when making a compelling case for funding to talk about past successes that you've had, what a successful project looks like, and the outcomes and benefits that your project is going to have, whether that's in the community or for an audience or, for yourself or your organization. Oftentimes you'll have to submit budget documents. And that could be something as simple as like an expense sheet for all of the expenses for your project. Sometimes, if you're applying for federal funding and you're a nonprofit organization, you have to provide audited financial information, profit and loss statements, all of that. But financials are always an important part. You want to be able to really clearly demonstrate how you're going to use the money that you receive.
Jess, may I ask a question here, or you want to wait?
Please, yeah, please do.
So now for a beginner, for someone who, like, for example, for myself, I've had a number of productions on stage before, but they were always as a part of someone else's like theater festival.
Sure.
Okay. So, I mean, so I sold tickets and I didn't make any money though. And I needed to turn it over to the producer of the whole program. You know what I mean? So, and I had to pay out of pocket for certain things, props and when I paid casts and stuff like that. But so I really wouldn't have any records, especially as being a part of someone else's theater event. So that creates a problem, I think.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good example, Laura. So let's kind of talk through that a little bit, because that is a good example. But I think what I would emphasize is that experience that you have is really valid and, supports you as someone who's, worthy of funding, because it validates, your experience, it demonstrates that you have been part of, productions in the past. So while you might not have, numbers as far as ticket sales or, revenue or expenses or anything like that, I would think about providing some details about your experience, maybe at a higher level, that lend your application some heft. So if you can say that you have been, in productions for 20 years and you've done 15 productions in 3 counties or 5 communities or something like that.
Okay.
I would sort of think about some bullet points along those lines that really validate your experience.
Okay. All right. That's one way to go about it. If you don't have, if you can't, don't have an example of, if you don't have solid, I mean, the person who put on the whole production, of course, would have figures, but those figures included the other people who are part of this festival also. So, okay. So I guess, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I would just try to paint a picture of the experiences that you've had, the places you've been, number of performances, something like that, that speaks to your experience and credibility, right? And then once you get your first grant, then you'll start to build that sort of database as far as your expenses and your profits and the number of people who attended and that sort of thing.
Okay. Got it. Thank you, Jess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, Caitlin, if you want to provide anything anecdotal, but I would say, especially with grants like the types of grants GVCA is dealing in, it is very common for folks to be sort of crossing that threshold where, maybe they were part of an organization or a group in the past, and now they're looking for individual funding for a project that they're doing on their own.
Yes, we definitely have quite a few applicants that when we've done surveys, for example, at the end of the year to determine like, how did you learn about our grant? A good chunk of those individuals are people that have worked collaboratively with other projects. For example, Dances at Muck. Ruben is a really great example of going, and obviously he does stuff with Muck at Dances at Muck, but he also applies for his own grants through NISCA and things like that. Biodance is another option to look at, where they have a group of choreographers, but several of their choreographers have done their own thing separate from everybody else in that group. So we, in that case, look at like what Jess was saying, the quality of what have you produced? You can show that you have this track record of producing things that have been performed at Muck or various places around Rochester or Livingston County that, they're reputable locations. People will go there to see shows, and you don't always know who the people is that's hosting the event, but it's a great way to learn about new artists in the community.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a really great example, Laura. Thanks for raising that one.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So some tips and tricks as you sort of get started on the content creation process. What I always recommend is to create an offline document outline. And what I mean by that is you will find many funding opportunities that have online applications. Really slick, online forms to fill out right online in a web portal and submit. Love that. That's great. But I like being able to draft content, step away, come back, massage it, add more content. So whenever I encounter an online application form, I duplicate it in, a Word document or a Google Doc or another, even a notepad if you want to go old school, and just, give yourself the space to work on that offline. I'm always one of those people that's afraid I'm going to hit submit too early and submit an incomplete grant application. So that's what I like to do. Create an offline document to start drafting your content. Don't leave any sections blank. Even if a section of the application does not apply to you, respond to why it's not applicable or why you think you don't have any information to submit there. That just demonstrates that you didn't skip it intentionally or overlook it, right? Then whoever's reviewing your application will know why, they won't see a blank field and say, oh, this person was negligent or missed this. You will be explicitly saying this does not apply to me because this is my first project, or I am not a nonprofit organization, or, I don't have a tax return or whatever reason, but don't leave anything blank. Double check your list for addendums and supporting documentation. So oftentimes you will be asked to submit your grant application, but then supporting documentation. So last year's tax return or W-2 or profit and loss statement or separate list of your stakeholders or collaborators or a budget sheet. So just make sure if there's more than just your application you need to submit, you're submitting all the documentation that's required. This one's probably a given, but I got to put it out there. Communicate clearly using appropriate language. So this is sort of tied to the know your audience. When you're applying for a grant like a GVCA grant, for example, you're dealing with a creative audience. You can use creative language. the grant narrative that I would write for a GVCA grant might be a little bit different than the narrative language I would use for a Bausch Foundation grant, right? That's a little bit more buttoned up, probably a lot less creative, maybe more business-like. So I would just think about that a little bit as you write your content. Leverage formatting to organize your content. So I like to think about the person who's going to be receiving your application and be conscious of the fact that that person's going to get a lot of applications for funding. So I don't know, Caitlin, like how many applications does GVCA get?
So on average between the two counties pre-COVID, Monroe County would get between 35 and 40 applications. Livingston County would get somewhere between 20 and 30. This year we are looking to significantly increase that number. So, you know, figure 20 applications, and there is 6 to 8 narrative questions depending on which of the 3 grants you're going for, and they're all 15 to 2,500 characters. So they do get to be some pretty long essays for our panelists to review and me to review for that first round.
Yeah, so that really adds up. You know, that's a good number of pages and characters for an organization like GVCA. And if you're doing an application that with nationally available funding, so one grant that I used to apply for often when I was at Girls Rock was the Ben and Jerry Foundation, the ice cream foundation funding, but that you're competing against, you know, everybody in their area. So, you know, that could be hundreds or thousands of grant applications. So try to consider, you know, somebody who's looking at many of these applications and how you can organize your content in a way that makes it very easy for them to read. So breaking things up into paragraphs and sections with, you know, headings and, you know, the appropriate groupings of content, I think is really helpful. You know, obviously you don't want to send anything handwritten. I don't think anybody would do that anyway, but worth throwing that out there. Make sure it's, you know, nicely presented and organized. And definitely have somebody proofread it. I am always happy to proofread people's applications. I am not a decision maker in the GVCA granting process by any means. I have nothing to do with it. I'm just on the board, but the board isn't involved in grant determinations. But I always offer to review people's grants, even if you just, you know, send it to your mom or your sister or your English teacher, like have literally any second set of eyes look at it, because by the time you have worked on this content, you will have looked at it so many times, you know, stuff won't jump out to you anymore. And they can call out spelling, grammar, even just stuff that doesn't make sense to a lay person. Make sure you have somebody else review it.
That is one of my top tips for people, is to have someone else review a grant and try to have someone to review it that is within your art genre and someone who is not within your art genre, because not everybody that is on the panel will be a dancer or a sculptor per se. So having someone that is more of a lay person that doesn't know all of the terminology that you may use in your application, but can still understand what is happening and what you are trying to express is it's a skill, and it takes a lot of practice, but it's something that I highly recommend to everybody, because you can use many terms and things that someone who doesn't know anything about your art form will have no idea what's going on. So you want to make sure that it both represents what you are trying to do, but anyone can read it and understand what you're trying to have come across.
That's great. I had a question.
Yeah, Donna.
So this is all very helpful. You had said something earlier about validation of experience and painting a picture of success and credibility.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering about, all of my success and credibility and professionalism has been in Ontario County, in in Geneva, I have produced, umpteen concerts of all different kinds and worked with community there and received grants and did arts triathlons with like just all this stuff, but not in, like, I just moved to Rochester like 6 years ago. So should I focus on dances at Muck and the history and validate that success and credibility, and not speak about my own as a director, or try to do both succinctly?
Yeah, honestly, I would try to do both, Donna, because that's the full
Okay.
picture of your experience.
Okay.
And, as somebody from Rochester and as an organization that supports both Rochester and Livingston County, we're so lucky to have Donna in our community, now.
Yeah.
It's like, let us give you money to stay in Rochester.
Yes.
Don't leave us.
I will also tell you, Donna, we do have an individual that was funded. I'm not going to say where they are originally from, just to keep them anonymous, but they were from somewhere in Europe. So they had I think 15 years of experience in Europe, and they have dual citizenship, and they live in Rochester. So a good portion of their resume was, their work in Europe and then stuff here in Rochester as well.
Great.
Yeah. And I think you can talk about, use that as a leverage point, Donna, right? Like, you haven't maybe done some of those things in this particular new community that you're in, which means that we need you, right? Like, we didn't have you before, we definitely need you now. But also maybe what's similar and what's different from the communities that you were in before versus the Rochester area, and, how can Rochester benefit, and what great outcomes did you see in Ontario before? You said did you say Ontario? Ontario, yeah. So, how can we have those same outcomes and experiences in the Rochester community? Or maybe it's a matter of the differences in those communities. Rochester being maybe a more metropolitan area, maybe the benefits will be far more significant in Rochester because we have a more urban population. So that could be something that you speak to.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so we've talked about content creation. We've done some tips and tricks. The next part is to take a deep breath, because it feels like a lot of work. And I would always get overwhelmed every time I started an application, but if you break it down and get yourself organized, it's not overwhelming, I promise. So take a step back, organize your time and organize your content. And what I would do is I would just break it down into bite-sized pieces, right? So I would block time on my calendar to just spend an hour or two looking over all of the information about the funding opportunity, familiarizing myself with the organization, their stakeholders, the community that they serve, all of the details around the grant, so that I was very plugged into the audience, sort of framing your mindset for who you're going to be speaking to through your grant application. So that was like, a couple hours one day, walk away, go to bed, take a nap, whatever, come back another time, fresh eyes, start to create an outline. So just, very high level, all of the sections of the grant, all the required bits of information, just a rough draft of an outline so that you're capturing all of the pieces and you're just trying to rough out a draft. And then I would take a couple different sessions to start to flesh out that content. So, the narrative itself, what is my project? Pulling together information about, my organization, the history, the community that I'm serving, all of those things. Whole separate session just to work on supporting documentation. This was the part that I used to find so annoying, because I've got to dig through the file cabinet, or I've got to go find the tax return, or I've got to run a report in QuickBooks. It's just annoying administrative stuff, where I got to get signatures from my board of directors. So carve out a whole day for that, where you're not even writing narrative and doing other stuff, but you're just putting together your supporting documentation. Then separate day, separate session, you do a front to back review. So you put all of your information together and you kind of sit down like the person who's going to be receiving your grant. So you put your Caitlin hat on and you look at your application. How does my narrative read? Do I have all of my supporting documentation? Is everything look really good here and make sense? Am I forgetting anything? Good to go. Walk away, come back another day, do one final review, and maybe involve a friend or a family member or somebody to look over your grant as well, where you're just looking at the cosmetics, the spelling, the grammar, the formatting. Does it look really good? Then off it goes. So this is how I would kind of break it down into manageable steps. If you look at it this way and you spend maybe a couple hours twice a week on each of these steps, really in 3 weeks, you've done a grant application. You're in good shape. I mean, if you want to make even more time, spend an hour a day, and in a week, you could potentially have a grant application in. So break it down into little bites. What is that expression? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Just like that.
Hey, Jess.
Yeah.
Oops. Where you said, the last one where you said content round 1.
Mhm.
Content, could you, maybe I missed that. Could you just talk about that again? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Content
So,
round
I
one.
mean, typically, depending on your grant, Laura, you might have to have a lot of content in your application. I think GVCA grant, you're lucky you've got sort of a character limit in that application. So you are a little bit restricted in how much you can write. You're not going to send, you're not going to send in 20 pages of narrative. Some applications get really long though. Sometimes if you have to get into, 10 years of organizational history and former projects and outcomes and your proposed project and your budget. And sometimes that can go on and on. So I always had a couple different sessions where I was just filling in more of that content to make sure it was all there. In a GVCA situation, you might have the opposite problem. In round 1, you might spill your guts in that application. And then in round 2, you have to come back and edit it down.
Oh, okay.
You've got too many characters in there and you have to tell your story in a more succinct fashion. So that's just really just a couple of rounds of massaging that content to make sure, you're telling your story really well.
Okay. Now, are you telling the story about just what your process or what you've been doing, or are you talking about the particular project you want to do?
You're doing both, Laura. So you want to make sure that you're telling the story of who you are or who your organization is, the experience that you have, really positioning yourself as a credible person and someone who is going to be able to pull this off, if you will. And then also talking in detail about the project itself. What are you going to do with the money?
Okay, got it. Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I used to call my grant compendium when I was at Girls Rock. So I used a Google Doc. I really liked Google Docs because you can have a nice table of contents that's sort of searchable and easy to navigate, but use the tool of your choice. And what it became for me, this compendium, was really, I don't want to say a dumping ground because it was much more organized than that, but it was like a library of content that I could plug and play into different grant applications.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it was really helpful. And, it's something that you build over time. So it's not like you guys are going to, if this is your first grant application, sit down and type up, this whole long document, but build it over time. So start with your first grant application. And And also, you can pull together your basic information, right? So important identification numbers, your tax ID, your EIN, any important identifying numbers, your contact information. So, what's your mailing address and phone number and email address, so that you can just sort of copy paste really quickly when you're creating documents. Board members or stakeholders. So if you have board members or stakeholders, you'll know in your applications, you usually have to provide all of their information, oftentimes addresses and phone numbers. And sometimes you have to provide, the organizations that they work for and the number of years of experience they have. So you can pull that information together and have that living in your compendium. Your organizational history, or in some cases, your personal history or professional experience. So think about like sort of writing a bio. Mission, vision, purpose. We see that for every nonprofit organization that has to write a grant application, but even for creative folks who are requesting funding for a project. Think about, typing up a brief paragraph on your mission and your vision and your purpose. Why do you create what you create? Why is this project important to you? So when I put together my compendium, I collected all of the previous content that had been used for grant applications in the past. But you can just start with if this is your first grant with GBCA, this will be the foundation for your compendium. Use headers to organize that content for easy searching and copying and pasting. So I'm going to show you on the next slide what it looks like. And then keep adding content. As you submit new grant applications, you'll be writing more narrative language, more content. Keep adding it to your content library, because then you never know when you're going to be able to just pull it out and reuse it again, or pull it out, make minor edits, and use it as part of a new application.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tried to do with this compendium is just build out this nice content library so that it became more manageable to apply for 5 grants or 10 grants in a month, because I was doing a lot of plugging and playing and not having to write stuff from scratch. So this is a little peek at what I was using at Girls Rock. So you can see all of these sections here I had, and in Google Docs, you could click on these sections and it would skip you down to, the mission statement, information about our volunteers and our volunteer vetting process, program descriptions, outcomes from previous camp seasons with data and anecdotes and things that were, compelling to add to grants. Past successes, all kinds of great stuff. Specific things that we had done for young women or gender nonconforming youth, like those were great sections depending on what kinds of grants I was applying for. If I was applying for funding from, certain organizations that were looking to fund programs that were specifically for young women, I would pull that content out, versus an LGBTQ giving circle, I would pull out, information about our LGBTQ programming. So kind of nice to have the information broken out that way. Then I can skip down to it, copy, paste, maybe make a little edits to update things, but it made it really easy. Questions? Oops, sorry, I'm skipping around here. Okay. So awards, this is the fun part. You find out you get money. Congratulations, you've been awarded. Caitlin's going to call you up. She's going to show up at your house with this big check and she's going to say, you just won. She's got the balloons like Publishers Clearinghouse. There's like a film crew. It's the best. You have all of that, right, Caitlin?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. Yeah.
We could set it up so like the GVCA board of directors shows up at your house with like balloons and a big check. That might be kind of fun.
That would be a fun field trip for all of you to do.
So when you've been awarded, just some rules of the road. Obviously, you're going to thank Caitlin and everybody who was involved because you're so appreciative. You want to get permission before you go public. So sometimes you will find out in advance of a public announcement about who's been awarded. So just make sure you're really clear on, before you go tweeting or, posting on Instagram or whatever, a picture of your big giant check. You want to make sure that it's public information and you can make an announcement. Definitely celebrate. Get yourself a glass of wine or whatever you need because you worked really hard to get that funding. So celebrate that. And make sure you save everything for when it comes time to submit your report. So any information, any emails you get, put them in an email folder, keep it organized. Any papers, keep them in a file. Just to make sure, sometimes these are longer projects, right? You might not be finished for 6 months or a year or maybe a couple of years. So make sure you save all of your information. So when it comes time to report on your outcomes, how you use the money, all of that information is organized and available.
Okay. Will most grants require that, Jess, that you do a report to them after the money's spent?
Most of them do, Laura. Yep. I'll talk about that a little bit more in my presentation. And then maybe at the end, Caitlin, you can talk about the reporting requirements for the GVCA grant specifically.
Yep, I can do that.
Cool. So rejections, sorry, this is a bummer, but it happens. And the more grants you apply for, the more rejections you will get, but it's all a learning experience. So when you get rejections, thank them. Of course, you still want to express gratitude, and ask for feedback. This is something that I don't think people do enough. And, especially with, access to somebody like Caitlin, who's in a grant coordinator role, that is what she's here to do, provide feedback. So sometimes it won't be, presented to you out of the gate. You might just get like a form rejection, sorry. Sometimes you do have to sort of take that extra step and say, hey, I would really love when you have time to get some feedback on why I wasn't a fit or what programs you did fund and how I can do this differently next time. Follow, if you're not awarded, follow through public channels, not in a creepy stalkerish way, who does get awarded the funding so that you can sort of reflect on, okay, are they funding mostly, I don't know, the certain kinds of projects or certain kinds of organizations? What are the differences between the organizations who are funded and my organization, so that you can sort of take that away for next time. And I would always plug those notes into my spreadsheet so that I know a year from now, if I've got 5 grant opportunities in September, I'll probably spend my time and prioritize the ones that I've been awarded in the past or where I feel like I have a better shot versus, I've applied to this foundation 4 times and I get rejected every time and they don't give me any feedback. I might stop wasting my time at that point. Make notes for next time, like I just mentioned. The grant coordinator or your other points of contact should be able to provide you with feedback, so always ask for it. Do not reach out to board members or try to figure out who was on the application panel or approach anyone that you think may have been involved in the application review process, because that's super awkward for them. They have a very cool and important job of determining how funds are going to be distributed, but also, we've got to kind of respect their privacy and, understand that those are tough decisions for them to make. And, they were entrusted to make those decisions for a reason. We don't ever want to confront them or call them out on social media or write them a letter and send it to their house or anything like that. Okay, so Laura, here's the reporting part. Got to provide appropriate reports. And Caitlin, this might not even be the GVCA reporting requirements anymore. This might be old. So this is just for example purposes, and I'll let Caitlin speak to the GBCA stuff, but when you submit your application, the reporting requirements are either going to be available at the time of application or once you're awarded, but that should all be very transparent and upfront for you, what you need to report. Sometimes the organization that you've been funded by is going to have a specific format or form for you to fill out to report back on how you used your funding. So if they do provide that, make sure you use that. Sometimes it's a little more casual. Sometimes casual is good. So if a form isn't provided, you can create a report based on your application or your grant narrative. So what I used to do is I used to take my original grant application and sort of say, okay, this is what I told you I was going to do. This is what I actually did. This is the money that I thought I was going to spend. This is what I actually spent. So really illustrating again, this is the project that you funded. This is the project that I delivered. It's not always going to be the same. Stuff happens, things change, and that's okay. So, Caitlin, do you want to talk a little bit about GBCA reporting requirements?
Yes. So our final report is actually directly attached to your application. So when you apply and you've been funded, there will be a form that's just like a drop down below your application within submittables. So you can directly, as Jess just said, scroll up to your application and see, what did I say I was going to do? What were my goals and expectations? Like I said, I was going to do 8 performances of a play, and house average is normally 50 to 80 people per night. So my goal is to hit this many people for the shows.
Okay.
And then you'll be able to take the attendance of what your actual shows were and say, we did this, we did more than we had more people come than we thought because we took this initiative with marketing that we'd never done before, and it succeeded really well. And you kind of give an overview based on that. And if you met the criteria for the grant within the artistic merit and things like that. We do have a specific budget form that we request everybody use just to make sure everything is consistent across the board. Since we do have so many different groups responding, it just makes it a lot easier for everybody to be using the same form. And that is linked within the form for you to find. And we also request any marketing that you did within, for example, a PDF of screenshots of what you did on Facebook. And if you can include analytics within that, that's great. Copy of any press releases that you did and that sort of thing. And that also helps for us to confirm that you withheld your contract, as there is some accreditation wording that we require within our contract. So that also helps for us to confirm. If I wasn't able to go in person to your event and look in your program, okay, I have a copy of your program and I can see it says our credit statement and logo there as referencing that we helped to fund this project.
Okay. Question for Jess.
Yeah.
Jess, you said you applied for a number of grants. And for specific projects, did you normally stay within budget, or what happened? Did you not have enough money for certain things? What would normally happen?
Yeah, Laura, all kinds of things happened when I was at Girls Rock. It's really interesting. I'm going to pop to my next slide because the reporting piece is, the intention is to prove that you did what you said you were going to do. But sometimes you have to pivot. So I was the executive director of Girls Rock, during the pandemic. And so we had received significant grant funding to put on a summer camp for kids, and we couldn't do that. But instead, we were able to pivot. We were able to take that funding and use it to get iPads and hotspots, mobile hotspots, so that our kids who are mostly in the city of Rochester and had, limited access to technology could attend a virtual summer camp. And somehow we managed to pull off virtual children's summer camp. I still don't know how we did it. I've kind of blocked it out of my mind. It was a very weird experience. The kids all had fun. It was great. But it did make for interesting reporting at the end of that grant cycle, because we had to go back to the organizations who had funded us and said, hey, you were really excited to give us money to put on a cool rock and roll summer camp for kids. We kind of did that, but we had to do it a little bit differently.
Oh, that's so fun. It sounds like a good save.
Yeah, it was. It was a great save. And, we didn't have anybody come back to us and say, hey, we want our money back because you didn't say what you were going to do. We were still able to demonstrate all the kids that had intended to come to in-person camp were able to attend virtually. The experience was not the same, but it was pretty similar, and it was probably the best we could have done in a pandemic. So yeah, it was still pretty good. But sometimes, even when, it's not a pandemic situation, you will go over budget, and, or you'll be way under budget. So it's tough to anticipate those things. And the key thing is just to be very transparent in your reporting. And just, sort of demonstrate that, while you may not have done exactly what you said you were going to do, sometimes there's great unexpected outcomes that you didn't even anticipate. So that can be really great too. You can include those. And then when you create your reports, take that content as well, because there's going to be a lot of outcome stuff there and metrics. Put that back in that compendium document that you're starting, because then when you write your next grant, you're going to refer to this completed project and say, I just pulled off this great project that was funded by GBCA. This is how much it costs. This is how many people attended. These are the great things that came of that project. And that just boosts your credibility, right? You've received grant funding in the past. You've been successful with that. Here's some metrics, and I think that just positions you really well for your next grant.
Great. Oh, Caitlin, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be so abrupt just now when one was asking, well, after you got through talking about the report process. So another question for you, Caitlin?
Yeah.
So after the report, that's basically, do you ever come back to people and say, I want more information, or?
Sometimes I do. I go through and I review the final reports, and sometimes I look at it and I'm like, you've got, 1,000 characters and you've given me 2 sentences. I need to know a little bit more about the marketing. What did you actually do? How did the Facebook posts go? How did, in your application, you said, you're going to try going through the local penny saver and put an ad in. Did you do that?
Oh, okay.
How did that go? Just to get a more well-rounded thing, since we do have so many projects that happen, I'm not able to attend everything. So that's kind of my chance to see, okay, how did it actually go? And a lot of the times it sounds very basic, but it's kind of like echo the question. So you said in this that you're going to do this. Did this happen? Yes or no? And why? And sometimes I do need to get a little bit more of that why and how from people, but I will come back and usually I will say, okay, these are the specific things I am looking for. Can you give me more information on them?
Okay. Oh, good. You just got to keep good records and take some notes along the way. So
yeah.
So I'm glad you guys are mentioning this reporting process. As I said, I'm starting at ground zero. I know nothing
Of course.
about it. So you're covering some good stuff. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you both for that.
It sounds as if it perhaps if you report accurately and thoroughly, that you have more of a chance of getting a grant again, right?
It does help, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would happen again. The panel changes every single year.
Oh, I
You may
see.
have one or
Okay.
two people that carry over or someone that has
I
gone to your
see.
event in the
Okay.
past, but
Oh, it's just kind of moot. All right.
there's never a
Hmm.
absolute that you will get funded every year. I
Mm.
unfortunately cannot promise that to every person.
Even if you submit a fabulous report, I hear you.
I will
had-
say, Donna, though, well, that's the case for GVCA. There are some organizations that you might be able to get funding from where it's not a different panel every year. So like a family foundation, for example, where you might have the same board of directors or, you know, the same group, like Giving Circle, for example. Sometimes those folks won't change, you know, from year to year very much.
Mhm.
So you could really establish yourself as a very successful grantee who follows through really well. So I certainly wouldn't discount that reporting.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's probably good to treat that reporting stage as if, you know, as if
As a
that might seal
potential.
the deal
Mhm.
for your next grant. Yeah.
I will say we do have some applicants that have been with us for many years. We've had one that was going for 13 years, and the originator
Wow.
of the program moved and the town took it up, and it's still going.
Wow.
And I do take notes as I'm going through the process and from year to year of like, okay, this person is really good at taking feedback. This person is really great at getting their reports in on time. This person isn't so great, because sometimes the panel does want to know, like, have you interacted with this person at all? Have you spoken with them? What are they like? Because it sometimes, since we are a smaller organization, we're able to have those more intimate conversations about the groups. I've had individuals that have applied where English isn't their first language. So writing an English application has been really difficult, but
Yeah.
they can speak English perfectly fine. And I have talked with them and I have a better understanding. So I've been able to give that sort of
That's great.
explanation to help the panel understand what the application is trying to say, that the
That's
written
excellent.
word isn't always conveying to the level that in the passion the person is trying to show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's great that you do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had one more question. Is this the time to ask it, or should I wait?
Absolutely. Yeah, go for it, Donna.
Yeah. I, having served as a panelist in the past, I was a part of Finger Lakes Arts Grants for years. I remember reading these, and then so I understand the process. But I also remember making a statement up front about the kinds of grants that we were looking for. And I find that really helpful. So it's more than just who's eligible. It's like, what are you all actually looking for? Is that information available?
For the GVCA grant specifically, Donna?
Or just, I love how you're doing sort of an overview of lots of grants, but yeah, for GVCA, but also any of the other ones, is that part of the protocol of panelists at this point, or is that missing, or what's your
I mean, in my
Okay.
experience, that varies a lot from
Okay.
grant opportunity to grant opportunity. So I feel like GVCA is pretty broad in that GVCA is funding lots of projects of different shapes and sizes. So we might have somebody who's doing, a visual arts project, and somebody who's doing, something, performance based. I mean, there's a real variety of stuff I think that GVCA has
So
funded.
it's more about quality and less about actual specifics. Yeah. So that's
I
good,
think-
actually. Yeah.
I think there is an element, though, Donna, I would say, of reading between the lines a little bit for organizations. So, I'm not going to ask Caitlin to validate anything I'm about to say, but I would say, in thinking of GVCA is an organization that supports 2 different counties in New York State, and 2 very different counties, right? I mean, Livingston County and Monroe County are so different. And so I think that organization really wants that same level of, variety and representation in who they're awarding grants to. An organization like Ben and Jerry's Foundation, for example, that was so oriented around, young people and children and experiences. That was sort of the way that I would tailor those grant narratives, was to really emphasize the experience component and that we were working specifically with kids. And you will find that, especially I think with the giving circles, because they are often very committed to quite specific causes.
Yeah, I would say that, yes, GBCA is more broad. As Jess was talking, I pulled up I'm sorry if you can hear my fiance in the background, my community arts guidelines, and one of the sections that says examples of previously funded community arts grant include community summer concert series, film festivals, theater, dance, and music productions, seasons and individual shows, and library programming. And that's just kind of a snapshot of that one grant under our umbrella of 3 grants for the last year. So those are a wide variety of things. And in just the organizations we fund, we have theaters, we have independent dance companies, we have a lot of towns and villages in Livingston County that apply, since there's not as many nonprofit organizations that are arts oriented, libraries and that sort of thing. So it is a very broad range of individuals and organizations that apply.
Great. Okay.
I am out of slides, so if anybody else has any questions or anything that they'd like to discuss, now's the time. And it doesn't have to be questions for me. If you have GBCA grant questions that Caitlin can answer, let's capitalize on that too.
Okay. Was someone else asking a question?
Nope, go ahead, Laura. It's all you.
Earlier, almost at the beginning, Jess, I believe you mentioned letters of intent and letters of support.
Yes.
Will you talk about that? What do you mean by that, and what?
Sure. Yeah. So a letter of intent is just that. It is not oftentimes, I would say maybe not as often anymore, but some organizations will require that you submit a letter of intent before you apply for a grant.
Oh.
And basically that's just an introductory letter. So really short letter, typically just a 1-pager, maybe a couple paragraphs. Thinking of it as an introduction. So,
Okay.
I'm Jess Southwell. I'm the executive director of Girls Rock Rochester. Here's a couple sentences about our organization. It is my intent to apply for grant funding from your organization, at the start of your next funding cycle, or something like that. Really just an introduction and a way to get added to the list, if you will. And sometimes there will be a vetting component to that. So if you have to be a nonprofit organization, you might have to submit proof of your 501c3 status, or, maybe your LLC paperwork or something like that, to legitimize you in case they're doing any kind of checking against those types of public records. So that's a letter of intent. A letter of support is typically part of your grant application process, and that would be from either community stakeholders or partner organizations or collaborators who are helping you with the project. And it's a formal way of them signaling that they support your organization or your project and are essentially saying, thumbs up, Laura is legit, give her this money, I'm going to help her with this project, or we are somehow invested in this project happening. And that can be a good way to, further legitimize yourself, right? Like maybe you're going off on your own for the first time doing a solo production. excuse me, but you have a letter of support from, a production company that you've worked with for many years, who is known in the community and can attest to your experience or, the value that you can bring with your project.
Okay. All
As
right.
far as our grants, we mainly use the letters of support within our arts and education grants as a way to show that the artist educator or arts education organization is partnering with, for example, a school, and they're going to do after school education programming with school number 12 in the Rochester City School District, and school 12 has agreed that they are going to work with this individual because we don't want to get applications saying, I want to work with them. And there's been no communication between the school whatsoever. We do prefer things to be on official letterhead. I have had people screenshot emails from like the principal saying, yeah, we're interested, but there's been no like concrete planning. So it just shows for us that, the conversations are happening, the program are being developed together between the two groups. The other version that we would see it within our grants would be if an individual is pairing with a nonprofit organization or an unchartered group is working with a nonprofit that is 501c3 to show we have this collaboration. They are going to act as our fiscal sponsor, and we have this relationship. We're not just putting their name on things. We use it mainly as to show that there is a relationship and a pairing going on there.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions that Caitlin and I can answer tonight?
You covered a lot. Some good stuff.
Yeah, it was a lot of info. I will share this slide deck with Caitlin, who has all of the registration information for everybody, because I do have some links here to the Community Foundation website, a great resource for federal grants, obviously the GVCA grant website, and my contact information is here if you want to reach out for proofreading or any kind of support. Always glad to help.
Yes. I do just want to note, as I'm looking at Jess's slide where it says GVCA DEC grants, the name of the grant was changed last year from decentralization grant to statewide community regrant, or SCR. So you'll see DEC or SCR in different places on our site, but SCR is what our grants are when you're looking for them.
Okay. So that's you that we should contact for a copy of the slides, Jess?
I'm going to send my slides out to Caitlin. She has everybody's contact information who was registered for tonight's session, and she'll share the slides out to you.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that. Thank you so much. Yes, I'd very much like to look over it again. And I was trying to screenshot and say, how could I save, especially that sheet where you have your grant information laid out?
Yeah.
I'd like to do something like that. And I was trying to see if I could copy it or somehow. But
yeah, I should have told everyone in advance. No need to take copious notes. I'm going to send the presentation out to everyone.
Yes. Well, at least I have lots of notes also. So the slides will be a bonus. I'd really appreciate that very much.
Yes. I will, this was recorded, so I'm going to pull the recording and I will share Jess's notes along with links to our guidelines, as well as our upcoming seminars, where I will go, it's about 2 hours going through each of our grants, the application process, what they are, how you do it, the whole thing. And then there's a Q&A section at the end, so you can go, okay, that didn't make sense. Please re-explain this. So there's that. And then our one-on-one sessions where you can sit with me via either in person or via Zoom or a phone call, and we can go through what questions you have individually and talk about your project and try to figure out how to develop it, along with our mentorship program, which is something that we started last year to connect recent applicants who received funding with new applicants in a similar art genre to help with some of the on-the-ground work. For example, I don't know anything about sculpture. I can't really help with the writing of that. I can help with theater and some dance, but if I can find a visual artist to pair you with, then I will make you friends and they can help answer some of those questions that I might not be able to.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I
Caitlin.
can't tell you all enough what an incredible granting experience GVCA has created, and really it's all Caitlin's efforts, but to be able to have information sessions and live Q&A and be able to book time with Caitlin for one-on-ones is really not the norm in the grant application world. Oftentimes you are submitting to what feels like a black hole without a real person to contact. So you're going to get white glove experience with the GVCA grant.
It's great. Yeah, it's great that that's offered. Very appreciated.
Yeah.
Very much appreciate that.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate you all joining tonight and, being a part of the GVCA community. Like I said, Caitlin will send out the slides and everything that have my contact information in there. If I can provide you support on your funding journey, reach out.
Definitely will.
Everybody has a great evening.
Thank you so much, Jess. I very much appreciate this session tonight.
Yeah, thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you very much.
Caitlin.
Yes,
Great
thank you.
question. All right, take care, everybody. Have a nice
Okay.
evening.
Okay. Bye, everybody.